Hey guys, my name is Glickman, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about improving in Hunt Showdown, and really the areas that you might want to focus if your goal is to get better, climb the ranks, or maybe just be a better overall teammate. Now, this isn't going to be a video focusing on, gameplay highlights or crazy headshots or, clutch situations. This is going to be more on the mindset, the actions that you want to take, and really how you kind of want to approach it if improving at the game, or really any game, is your goal. So please, start doing some chores, sit tight, throw me on in the background, and let's talk a bit about what you really want to focus on to improve and get to that next level. If you've played Hunt for any amount of time, you've probably had nights where it feels like nothing is going your way. You could lose 3 hunters in a row, maybe you got headshot from somewhere you didn't even know somebody could be, or maybe your teammates just die instantly, and by the end of the night, you're wondering, have I actually gotten worse at this game? No, you probably haven't, but, that's how you feel. And I think one of the biggest reasons that people stop improving in Hunt isn't because they've hit some magical skill ceiling. It's because they've stopped trying to improve with intention. And what I mean by that is that they keep playing the game, but they aren't actually practicing anything. So if your goal is to improve, the very first thing that you need to do is figure out exactly what you're trying to improve. Do you want a higher KDA? Do you want to be a better teammate? Do you want better aim, positioning, better decision making? Maybe it's all of those. There's nothing wrong with wanting to improve everything, but if you don't know what you're working on, it's really hard to notice yourself getting better. Now, you'll jump from one thing to another every single match, putting focused effort into a bunch of different things, but not one specific skill. But, no matter what your goal is, whether it's aim, positioning, game sense, or just surviving more fights, every bit of improvement starts with the same thing, and that's your mindset. You have to accept that improvement in Hunt is going to take some time. This is absolutely not a game where you can watch one guide and immediately become the king of the bayou and start wiping lobbies. Extraction shooters in general have some of the steepest learning curves in gaming, and Hunt is absolutely no exception. As you improve, the game also starts putting you against better and better players. And some of these players that you're playing against have tens of thousands of hours in Hunt alone. That is an immense amount of time to learn the game inside and out. And playing against those players can be very difficult, and that means that your improvement isn't always going to feel super obvious. You might be genuinely making better decisions than you were a month ago, but because your opponents are also getting better and more challenging to play against, your results don't always reflect that immediately, and that's totally normal. It's going to take time to start seeing those results in those small improvements. Now, one of the biggest walls that I see people hit is refusing to accept that sometimes losing that fight was their fault. Now, that doesn't mean that every death is your fault. Sometimes you just get shot out of nowhere. Sometimes somebody lands an unbelievable shot on you, and sometimes the other team just gets lucky. That happens. But Hunt itself is an incredibly punishing game. A game where one single mistake can completely change the outcome of a fight. So maybe you were slightly out of position. Maybe you went for a revive a little bit too early, or maybe you repeaked an angle when you really shouldn't have. Maybe you missed that one critical shot that would have turned the fight, and those little mistakes matter. The important part, though, isn't beating yourself up over them. The important part here is asking yourself one simple question every time you die. And that is, what could I have done differently? Not what your teammates should have done, not what the enemy got lucky doing, but what could I have done better? Because that's the only thing that you can actually improve. There's one thing that I've had to catch myself doing over the years, and that's immediately thinking about what my teammates could have done differently. Especially when you're in random queues with random teammates, it's really, really easy to think, well, if my team would have just pushed with me, or what if they had hit their shot, or what if they had, in a better position, or what if they had done something different? And maybe that's right. Maybe it is correct. Maybe that fight would have been different if they would have done something differently, but that doesn't matter. You cannot improve your random teammates. What you can do is you can improve yourself. So instead of focusing on everybody else's mistakes, ask yourself if you miss shots. Did you take unnecessary damage? Did you push without the right information, or did you maybe peek an angle that you shouldn't have? That's where the growth actually happens. Focus on what you can control, and don't focus on things that are outside of your control. Another thing that holds people back is ego. Ego itself can be a good thing in moderation. Having confidence will win you fights. Believing that you can win that fight is very important. Believing that you can turn a situation is absolutely important. But there is a difference between confidence and refusing to acknowledge your own mistakes. Now, we've all seen this. Somebody gets killed by a really good shot and immediately they say, that guy's cheating. I know that guy's a cheater. They go to his Steam profile. They see a bunch of comments calling this person a cheater. It's impossible. There's no way that this person was able to make that shot without cheating. Now, sure, cheaters absolutely exist. There's nobody saying that they don't. But most of the time you hear that, that's just a coping mechanism from the person that got killed. It's much easier to believe that a shot was impossible than to accept that somebody made a play that you couldn't. Now, there's a problem with that. The problem with that mindset is that it completely shuts the door on improvement. You need to be able to keep an open mind in these situations. There will always be somebody that's better than you. Even the best of the best hunt players lose. They don't win every single game. The difference isn't that they never die. The difference is that they're consistently making better decisions. They're choosing better positions. Maybe they're managing their resources better. They're recognizing advantages and pushing at different times when they should be. They're making the correct decision more often than just the average player. And that brings me to something that I think a lot of people really misunderstand about Hunt itself, and that's that the best Hunt players are not always the best aimers. Obviously, good aim helps. Being able to hit your shots absolutely helps, but aim alone in Hunt will only get you so far. If you spend any amount of time watching high-level Hunt gameplay, you'll notice something very specific, and it's not just non-stop impossible headshots. A lot of what wins these fights happens before the fight even starts. It happens before anybody even fires. It's about taking the better position. It's about rotating at the right time, backing off when the fight isn't favorable. Maybe recognizing when the enemy has wasted resources, creating angles where you have multiple opportunities to shoot while they only have one. Good positioning does not just make you harder to kill. It gives you more opportunities to make mistakes. If you're standing in the open and you miss your shot, you're probably dead. You are probably as good as dead as soon as you miss. If you're playing strong cover, good angles, good positioning, maybe you miss once. You can then reposition. Maybe you take another angle, you can shoot again. You take another angle, you can shoot again. That's multiple times that you get the opportunity to hit your shot. And the best players often land more shots, not just because they're better aimers, but because they've created these situations where they get 3 or 4 chances instead of just one to hit those shots. And eventually, all of that, all that we are discussing, all of that becomes game sense. Knowing where teams rotate, knowing the common peak spots, knowing which fights that you should take, which fights you shouldn't take, which fights you should just absolutely leave. Sometimes surviving is actually just the best play. On the topic of game sense, there's one mechanic in Hunt that I think is more important than anything else, and that would be sound. Sound is the greatest source of information in Hunt. It has an incredible sound system that tells you when and where things are happening and where people are on the map. Gunshots, they can be heard across the map. Sound traps tell you where teams are coming from, how far away they're coming from. AI making noise or screaming or dying in making noise can tell you that there's people in your immediate area. All of that is information. But I think that a lot of players approach sound in this game, the wrong way. And that's that they're so focused on never making noise that they forget what actually matters. And here's what I mean. And I'm going to come in with a hot take, even though I don't think it's a hot take. Some people might think this is a hot take. I do not think that Hunt is a stealth game. I think that Hunt is a game with stealth mechanics. Now, there's a big difference. Good players aren't trying to play perfectly silent for 30 minutes. They're not sneaking around the map crouching everywhere. What they're doing is they're thinking about what happens after they make noise. If you set off crows, what does that mean? What does another team now know that might be in your area? Where are they now expecting you to come from? Can you rotate to catch them off guard? Maybe you stop moving and listen. Can you then approach from somewhere unexpected, a different angle? Maybe you completely disengage. Making noise isn't automatically what gets people killed. What gets people killed is being predictable. Now, that leads me into another point, and I think this point is really important. Sometimes the objectively correct play is not actually the play that wins you the game. Everybody always says never re-peek. Generally, that's really good advice. Against really good players, re-peeking the same angle over and over is going to get you killed. That being said, Hunt is not played inside of a vacuum. Sometimes your opponent expects you to rotate. Sometimes they expect you to not re-peek again. And every now and then, making the unexpected decision and doing the play that they're not expecting you to do that's objectively the bad play is exactly what wins that fight. In fighting games, there's a concept that's called a mix-up, and the entire idea is forcing your opponent to guess wrong. And Hunt has the exact same thing. If every single decision that you make is the objectively correct decision, you become predictable, and good players are going to be able to read you like a book. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be making bad plays just to be unpredictable, but it means to not be so rigid that you feel like you have to make the objectively best decision every single time, as that could get you killed. Being unpredictable can win you the fight. Now, finally, let's talk about mechanics. If your goal is improving your aim, the shooting range is one of the best tools, if not the best tool that's currently in the game. I still like spending 5 or 10 minutes warming up before I play. Not because I'm trying to become a professional aimer overnight, but because I want my hands to wake up before I get into the bayou. Especially when they added in the moving targets. Those moving targets are fantastic for being able to learn the different bullet velocities, because that's what makes Hunt unique, is the bullet travel time and needing to adjust for every different gun that you use. Learning how to lead those shots with the weapons that you use, but that makes a big difference over time. But just remember, aim is only one piece of the puzzle. You do not become a better Hunt player just by shooting better only. You become a better Hunt player by thinking better, by reviewing the mistakes that you make instead of making excuses, by focusing on what you can control, by accepting that improvement takes time, and by understanding that every death in this game has something to teach you if you yourself are willing to learn from it. Now, at the end of the day, that's really what separates the players who plateau from the players who keep getting better. It's not the one group or one player that has naturally better aim. It's not the group or player that never loses. It's the player or group that treats every single match as another opportunity to learn something. And if you can build that mindset, I honestly, truthfully think that the improvement will come naturally. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But if you stay intentional with your practice and you focus on making one better decision at a time, eventually you'll look back and realize that you're winning fights that used to feel impossible. And that is when the game clicks and Hunt becomes a completely different game. If you made it to the end of this video, firstly, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you watching this content. If you like what you saw, please make sure that you leave a like and a comment down below with anything that you want to see moving forward, or if you disagree or heavily agree with anything that I said. Either way, I would love to have further discussion with you. Also, please make sure that you catch me live on Twitch. I stream 4 days a week currently, starting at 8 a.m. EST at twitch.tv/Glickman. I would love to see you all over there, and I would love to have further discussion. So until next time, thank you, and I'll see you soon.